This is a short video discussing what is a list in Python. A list in Python is a container. Much like a variable is a container, a list is a container. But a list is a container with a very specific structure, and the definition looks a little different. So let's kind of delve into it and we'll take a better look. The container that we call a list stores a sequence of values. And those values can be just about anything. They can be any of the types that we know about. They can be a string, they can be a float, they can be an integer. And when we get down the line, they can be another list. But for right now, we're going to concentrate on the three basic types: strings, floats, and integers. And every element within that list has a given position, and that'll become important in a minute. So first of all, how do I define a list? Well, let's say my list equals, and we're going to see a few different things here. I'm going to have an open bracket, and let's say I'm going to say a string, this is a list, and then I'm going to have an integer 4, and then I'm going to have a float 22.22. And that's a list. This is a list with three different elements. It contains a string, it contains an integer, it contains a float. Now, I can have a list with only strings and only integers and only floats, and I can combine them however I need them. That's one of the really nice things about Python, because a lot of other languages that are strongly typed will not allow this. So So what's different about defining a list? Well, firstly, it's these square brackets, okay? If you see square brackets outside of quotes in Python, you're dealing with a list. And what's similar? Well, I have a variable, whoops, sorry about that. I have a variable called myList on line 6. To the right of myList is a single equal sign. To the right of that is a list, and this whole thing that I have highlighted in blue is a list. So my list is a variable. We know that because it's to the left of the single equal sign, and the value associated with my list is the list that contains these three elements. Well, how do I get at the information inside of a list? Well, because I got three elements here, and I got my list, and if I just print my list, what's going to happen? Well, when I do that and run it, I get this nice little thing with brackets in it. But it's not a string, it's a list. So how do I get at the information in the list? Well, this is how I get at it. I can print the values in that list by using an accessor or an index. So each value in the list has an index, always starting at 0. So this is a list is at position 0. 4 is at position 1. And 22.22 is at position 2. So 3 elements in a list, 3 positions, 0, 1, and 2. So let me do some printing and I'll show you how to get at the elements in a list. So I'm going to say the element at index 0 is, and it's a string, so I'm going to say %s colon space, colon space %s, and then a new line. And I'm using a formatted string here, so I'm going to say %, and this is time I'm going to say my list of 0, because this is at the 0 position. Okay, so what happens if I run it? Well, I get the string, this is a list. That's great. So now let's try this for index of 2 and 3. So index at position 1 and the index of position 2. So let's run it now, and I have Element 0 is, this is a list, element 1 is 4, and element at index 2 is 22.22. So that's how I get at the information in a list. I get at it by using its index value. Okay? The index value will always be 1 less than the number of elements in the list. So if I think this is at position 1, then I want to subtract 1 and I know what its index is. Just like this is at position 3, so I subtract 1 and its index is 2. Well, how do I change the values in a list? And by the way, lists are a little different than strings. Strings are a list of characters, but you can't change the individual values. With a list, I can change the individual values. So what can I do to change the individual values? Well, first of all, I want to use my variable mylist. And let's say I want to change the string that says this is a list. And so that's at position 0. And I'm going to say equals changed. And then I'm going to print everything again. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to print these things. And I'm going to run it. And I have the old list. And now I have the new list with the word changed in it at position 0. And that's all you have to do to change something. So if I wanted to change something at position 2, I could change my list of 2 to, and it doesn't have to be a float. I could make it an integer. I just want that to be 5. And what do I have? I have changed 4 and 5. Or I could make it a string. Making it a string. And it's that easy to change elements in a list. Well, I'm not going to go to deleting it. I'm going to go to appending. So first of all, let's just define an empty list. Let's say empty. That's how you define an empty list. There is absolutely nothing in that list. There can't be. There's nothing between the square brackets. But let's say later on I want to put something in the square brackets. Well, let's see what happens. If I just say empty list of 0 equals 77.3, let's see what happens. I get an error. And the error is the element at index 0 is, this is a list. Wait a minute. List assignment index out of range. So it's telling me on line 26 that there's an index out of range because there is no element 0 to replace. This is empty. There's nothing in it. So how do I, in fact, append to a list? Well, I say empty list dot append, and then I say 77.3. Let's see what happens. And it worked. And then if I print my list, oops, empty list, which is no longer empty, I get 77.3. And then if I want to add something else, empty list dot no longer empty. I didn't need those extra colons or parentheses. So then I have empty list now has 77.3 and no longer empty. So that's how I add elements to a list. It's that simple. And if I have, let's say I have my list, but I want a 4th element in my list, I can simply say mylist.append adding to the list. And then I can print my list. So now we see that my list down here is got 4 elements in it because I used the append function. So append is a function you get for free with a list, and you just add elements to the list. So now how do I remove elements from a list? Well, there's a function for that. Let's say I'm dealing with empty list and I want to get rid of no longer empty. So I know that this is at index of 1, so I'm going to say empty list dot remove, and I'm going to say 1. Okay, what did I do wrong? X is not in list. So what I have done is I've given it an index, but I haven't given it the right piece of information. So I'm going to remove no longer empty. Let's see if that works. Yep. So I'm removing the element for no longer empty. And that's how I got rid of that one. So if we do empty list dot pop append, well, we can remove elements from the top of the list with the pop function, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But, oh, this is what I wanted to do, sorry. So if I print empty list again, after I do the remove, you'll see that there is only 1 element in the list. So this has been a very short introduction to dealing with lists and understanding what a list is in Python.